Hi, this is Sandra.
And I'm Saya.
And you're listening to Let's Talk About It. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Let's Talk About It. We are your hosts, Sandra.
And I'm Saya.
And today we will be talking about inequity and reopening.
Reopening public spaces during the COVID-19 pandemic has posed a great issue for public health officials and legislators. Schools, in particular, are a unique challenge. Schools play a critical role in providing a structured education environment for students, as well as supporting working families by providing a space for children to be during the day. Many students rely on schools for access to the internet and technology, food support, and a safe and structured space to learn overall. Balancing the health and safety of the community with the needs of students during this global pandemic has sparked a major debate about reopening schools. Some major concerns surrounding reopening are that many schools aren't designed with good ventilation systems, whether it's in the classrooms, bathrooms, or hallways. Also, coming from the perspective of a young person, people my age tend to not be the most vigilant about protecting themselves and others from illness. Because our prefrontal cortexes aren't fully developed, our risk assessment is very poor. Wearing masks for hours at a time can be uncomfortable, and if students want to take them off or decide to not social distance from their friends, it's difficult for teachers to constantly have to enforce safety measures while actually teaching in the classroom. Overall, there isn't enough research about the risks of children being carriers of COVID and the larger risks of reopening schools in the United States.
Thank you so much for that, Saya. You are so right. In order to ensure that reopened schools do not become a hotbed for the spread of coronavirus, New York schools need, and I mean need, funding for inspecting facilities, installing health technologies, and most importantly, sanitizing school spaces. But despite this acute need for funding, the Cuomo administration, get this, has withheld over $324 million in payments to schools in June and July. Schools aren't even sure if these cuts will either be temporary or permanent. This situation left the New York State United Teachers, which is a teacher union, to call on Cuomo and other lawmakers to raise taxes on the ultra-wealthy in New York and to tap deeper into rainy day funds. Even with barely any other ways to retain school funding, Cuomo still opposes raising taxes on the wealthy. There's only so much that can be done on the federal level, but Cuomo seems to think that raising taxes or any type of tax efforts should be done only on a federal basis. See, reopening schools costs more, not less. So answer this question. Why is Cuomo not finding other ways to increase school funding rather than making 20% reductions to school budgets? These cuts are causing many schools to rethink even opening back up. If the goal when it comes to education is to ensure that students have the best environment possible to learn, then why is the state not doing whatever necessary to meet that goal?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Sandra. Furthermore, why is the state not doing whatever it can to help low-income communities and schools in particular, who have been hit the hardest by the coronavirus in more ways than one? National and state-level data have suggested that people in communities of color, which aren't coincidentally low-income communities, are disproportionately affected by serious illnesses resulting from coronavirus because of underlying health and economic challenges they face. In terms of schooling, students who are homeless or housing insecure experience many challenges with online learning, as they can lack adequate access to technology and space to concentrate on their studies. By and large, school closures have exacerbated education gaps for students from low-income communities and for students of color. Because of these health and education concerns, lower-income school districts need to be even better equipped to handle the challenges surrounding reopening during COVID-19. However, schools in low-income districts already receive lower funding due to low property taxes. Cuomo cutting even more state funding will make it harder for these schools to invest in more resources that will create a safer environment for students. Especially in these times, the state and federal government must prioritize education and provide all districts with the resources they need to maintain a safe and functioning learning environment.
Joining us today is a big advocate for full funding of New York schools, our hopefully soon-to-be state senator for District 38, Mr. Elijah Reichlin Melnick. Born and raised in Nyack has dedicated his life to serving those in his community. He graduated Cornell University in 2006 with a bachelor's degree and went on to become an elementary school teacher in New Haven. His experience as an educator contributes heavily to his push for full funding of education. He currently serves as a legislative director for State Senator James Scoffus. He has spent the last decade building his legislative experience, and there's no doubt that he's the right person to represent District 38. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we start, I'd just like to ask one question. How would you like us to address you? Like first name, last name?
Elijah is great. You can use the first name. My last name's pretty long.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much again, Elijah. This is Saya speaking now. To give our listeners a little bit of context, what exactly is the role of state senator versus a representative, Saya?
Sure. So Saya, and thanks so much for inviting me. This is a fun opportunity. So state senators, there are 63 state senators in New York and 150 state assembly members. And the difference, both state senate and state assembly work and vote on the same type of state issues, which the state has a multi-billion-dollar budget every year. And so the state legislature is responsible for working on and voting on the budget. For passing new laws, and last year there were a lot of exciting new laws that passed in New York State, particularly on regards to climate change and gun safety laws to keep people safe, on women's right to choose, and a lot of other things that New York is able to legislate at. The only main difference between a state senator and a state assembly person is that we represent more constituents. The state senate districts each have about 300,000 people who live in them, and the assembly districts have maybe about 125 or 130,000 people. So it's a much bigger area.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for clearing that up for all of us, because I know I was confused about that too. So I have one question. If you were a teacher now, would you feel comfortable with returning back to school?
Wow, I think it would really depend on the school and on what they're doing to keep kids and teachers safe. It seems like what I have seen about the virus and all the evidence is it tends to spread more through the air than anything else. And so talking about places that have windows that open, places that have like an air filtration system or something so that you don't end up with could build up in the air and infect people that way. So I would think it would be much safer if you've got schools that are doing that and certainly doing the kind of deep cleaning and really trying to make it as safe as possible. But personally, since I'm on the younger side, I would probably feel safe enough, but I understand that for teachers who are older or might have pre-existing conditions that could make them more vulnerable, it's really tough.
Yeah, you're so right. And what are some resources that you think the state or federal government should be providing to all public schools to ensure that there's a safe environment for students, teachers, and employees to return to?
So money.
Yes.
that would be the big one. So we have one of the things which I have run on throughout this campaign is the need for New York State really to do a better job and a fairer job of funding local public schools. And we've got a formula actually called the Foundation Aid Formula that is supposed to be, it's agreed to by law. The state provides a certain amount of aid each year to each district as sort of a foundation to them. But ever since that was adopted, the state has never actually given as much money as it was supposed to under the law to districts. And that particularly hurts districts that are struggling, if they've got a tax base that's not as good, if they've got families that aren't earning as much money, it particularly hurts them. And it especially when a district is growing, the formula doesn't really get updated very much. And so districts are losing out a lot. And I know in the Senate district I'm running in, Ossining is a good example just up the road from Sleepy Hollow, where they've got a lot of new students there. The schools are growing and they're still not really getting enough money. And so the state, especially right now when there are so many new requirements on schools, and talking about an air filter or things like that, or hiring new people to clean, that's really expensive. And people in our area, in Westchester and in Rockland, which is also where the district is, pay a lot of money in property taxes. And if they're renters, they have a higher rent because the landlord is paying a lot of money in property taxes. So having the state help out, and right now, because New York doesn't have very much money because of COVID, having the federal government help out and support states is really important. Unfortunately, that is not happening, and the U.S. Senate in Washington has been blocking a lot of bills that would allow the federal government to spend more money and send money to states like New York to help get us through this crisis.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for saying that. Like, it all comes back to funding.
Yeah.
And we have a federal government that doesn't want to give us funding but is telling us to reopen. So what can we really do?
No,
So
it's really, it makes no sense.
it really doesn't. Like, we need Trump out. We need him gone.
We
So
do.
yeah. So we're going to take like a 30-second break just to recalibrate the recording thing. Okay, we're back.
Okay, so we're currently seeing budget cuts to schools, as we mentioned, and you briefly touched upon this. But in a little more detail, where are some areas that the state or federal government could draw money from in order to better fund our educations?
So that's a great question. And actually, I first just wanted to ask. I should have asked before. What's Sleepy Hollow doing? Are you back in school in person, a mix, or virtual still?
We're going to be doing a hybrid and virtual mix, so certain students can elect to come into school for half the week and then do virtual for the rest of the week, or we could just do virtual.
So it's really going to be up to each student and each family.
Yes.
Wow. What are you guys doing?
We're both going to be doing virtual learning, at least for the first few months.
Great, great. And so then to answer your question about where could the state be getting further money, so I think one obvious way that we should be doing that, and this has been a major piece of my campaign, is we should be raising income taxes on people who are making more than $5 million a year.
Exactly.
On up to billionaires. And not because we want to punish people because they're rich, but because we need the money from somewhere. And so if we're going to be asking people to pay more in taxes, I'd much rather ask somebody who can pay an extra, amount and not lose their quality of life. Versus if we don't do that, schools are going to cut, or they're going to have to raise taxes on local communities. And then you have regular working and middle class families who have to pay more, and they can't afford it. People lost their jobs or they lost their hours. And it's really, we should not be getting more money from people who are, who are already struggling, when you've got so many people who have way more, way more money, and they're able to afford an additional amount without losing their quality of life. So I think that's a big one. I think one of the other revenue sources that the state should be pursuing is to legalize marijuana and regulate and tax marijuana for sale.
Amen.
Yep. So that would be something which I support, and I think that's an obvious thing at this moment to, just to try to find ways to get additional revenue for the state.
Yeah, like I 100%.
And then we can use some of that on education.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And like, I don't know why the rich don't want to be taxed also. Like, I woke up today and I went on Facebook and I saw this person just like ranting and saying that the taxes in Sleepy Hollow are higher. And this person is like a millionaire. And like, they all started complaining about the Democrats and everything like that. I don't know why they don't understand. Like, this is just to improve everyone's quality of life because you can clearly afford it. So
yeah, I mean, nobody likes to pay money. I mean, I get that, but somebody has to.
Exactly.
If we want society, if we want good roads and you want good schools, and even if you don't send your kids to public schools, you should want good public schools, because having a workforce, having citizens, having residents who are well educated and able to succeed in life improves society, and it improves, it helps businesses, because if you're well educated and then earn a good living, you have more money to spend in businesses, buy stuff, and that helps all the people that run businesses. It just, we have a society, and there's a lot of things that we need to take to, that we need to have have the kind of country that we want to live in, and these aren't free. And so the money is going to come from somewhere, and to me, it's fairer and makes more sense. It comes from people, not entirely, but if you can pay more, you should pay more, and if you can't pay, then you should pay less. And
exactly.
Nobody chooses to be poor, and some people, there are plenty of hardworking people that still, nevertheless, don't make a lot of money, and there are plenty of lazy people that were born rich and stay rich. And everybody should work hard and try to succeed and get as far as they can. But I think it's the obligation for government to try to set up a level playing field so that if you do work hard, you have the most chance to try to succeed, and there's not systemic or structural barriers that hold people back.
Thank you so much for that. Like, contrary to what our president thinks, not everyone can become a billionaire. Like,
right. And had he not been, born and gotten, $1 million a year or whatever from his dad, I mean, of course we know he wouldn't be where he is now.
Exactly.
And, most of us can't go bankrupt multiple times and come out of that better than ever.
Exactly. Yeah, we can't come out of it being president. Like,
no. So we need to, in my mind, we got to get away that it's sort of this two-tier system where it just seems like if you've got, and we're not talking, you got a couple $100,000, like we're talking, mega
exactly.
millionaires. And it's a different standard of, justice. It's a different standard of the way society treats people. I think another good example is, there's been a lot of talk about, bail reform and criminal justice reform, and people saying, well, we shouldn't ever allow anybody out on bail or things like that. And you have somebody like Harvey Weinstein, who's a mega millionaire and is accused of multiple counts of sexual assault and rape, and he was released on bail and got to wait at home for his trial. And then you've got other people who don't have the money and don't have the expensive lawyers, and are accused of much less serious crimes than multiple counts of rape, and they are held in jail without bail to await trial. And that's, if one person is dangerous, the other one should be as well, and vice versa, but it should not be about how much money you have.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you so much for that. To move back to equity in schools opening, because we haven't been present in school for many months, many students aren't receiving adequate academic support. And as we've seen across the country, virtual learning has caused disproportionate learning losses for low-income students, which furthers education gaps. So what responsibility do you think that schools have to ensure that all students are receiving the aid they need in these times? And furthermore, what responsibility do you think the government has to supply schools with resources for these students?
So that's a great question. And I think to answer the last part of it, we sort of talked a little bit about already that the government, I think, absolutely has a total responsibility from the federal onto the state to be supplying schools with the resources they need to succeed and to help students. We can't it can't just fall to local communities to pick up all that slack. It's a very tough time, in order to, especially for kids who have special needs and things like that. It's hard to get, services sometimes, even in person in schools. And when I taught, I had students in my class who did have special needs, who had IEPs, which is what you have if you have a special need, to sort of spell out exactly, what it is that you need, what types of services you need. And those were, difficult and time consuming for the schools to provide under the best of circumstances. And now for students, if you need in-person, maybe somebody, is stuttering and needs a speech therapy. Maybe somebody needs additional emotional support. They've got an emotional, there's so many, somebody has, there are so many special needs. And being in a position where people can't be face-to-face, can't have the opportunity to work with somebody, it is something that I really worry about long-term for students that have this and are not getting the support they need. And so schools, I think, have to be creative and have to try to find a way to deliver these services even under these difficult conditions.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. So in our school, many students feel that the curriculum doesn't represent true history. It tells the dominant narrative, which is the one of white people and colonizers. And as a former educator, what do you think is an issue that exists in many school curriculums? If so, what are some steps we can take towards eliminating these biases?
Yeah, I mean, so we definitely, so I'm a former teacher. I was also a history major in college. And so I'm always really interested in history and trying to tell the full story. It is really important that we have schools that are giving the full, the full perspective about history. And we're especially if you're talking about American history, there's a lot of good in American history and there's a lot of bad. And I think we do people, you know, I think you do kids a disservice, you do students a disservice if um, if you present it as all one or all the other. It's particularly, it's a very complicated history, and so we do not want something, as you said, that's just going to be history from the dominant perspective, and only talks about white history, and only talks about certainly nothing that's going to glorify, as you said, the colonizers and things like that. I think it's important to really have the full perspective there, and let people know that at the same time there were as a nation, but we've struggled from the get-go with just constant widespread racism that's been embedded in society. And I do believe we are making progress, despite how it might seem with Trump in office now. But you look where we were 50 or 100 years ago, and we have made progress, but there's just obviously so much more to do. And being able to present that story that says, and just doesn't kind of whitewash the past, and say that everything glorifies people that had really troubling views and really troubling actions, but tries to give people the full picture. I think we have to.
Yeah, you're so right. And like I feel like one of the main people, like for me, that I've kind of been disillusioned by is like Christopher Columbus. Like I've been taught for so long that he's like so amazing, and really he's just a colonizer that committed a mass genocide of Native Americans. Like, and we had like a statue here in Terrytown, and then a petition to get the statue off, because you're literally putting that whitewashed history on a pedestal, like a literal pedestal. And I think like that's one of the biggest steps we have to take, is like, just if we're gonna do that, at least acknowledge the bad parts of history along with the good.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to learn. I think you do have to learn about Columbus, because love him or hate him, and these days most people are much closer to hate. He was an important historical figure.
Exactly.
The actions, his actions, obviously he didn't discover the New World, but to open it up to European settlement changed the course of history in so many ways. So I think you have to learn about him and everything in the whole colonial period, because that's that what happened in the past shapes what happened today. But clearly what you said, it used to be, certainly, I'm in my 30s, and when I was in elementary school, it was definitely a much more kind of, say, uncomplicated picture of Columbus, and just as he discovered everything, he discovered the New World, and it was great, and it was like yeah, there were Indians there, but it was indigenous people, and yeah, I think you have to give the full picture, and
Exactly.
and so clearly, when after he himself and the people who followed him from especially from Spain and Portugal, and then in North America from England and France, we are all living on land that was occupied by Native Americans, and of course is no longer, and that is the legacy that that has passed down to us for more than 500 years, since Columbus was trying to get to India.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much for that. We're going to take a little 30-second break again, just to recalibrate and stuff.
Sure.
So now we're going to begin what we'd kind of like to refer to as lightning round questions, where we're just going to ask you some lighthearted questions, kind of move away from like the really tough subjects. So I guess Saya is going to start.
Okay, to start us off, what's your favorite restaurant in Nyack?
So I really like the place called the Pasta Shop, or it's actually called DPNB Pasta Shop, for dropped pasta, not bombs. It's a great local place. They make all their pasta fresh and handmade right there, and serve it up very deliciously.
Awesome.
Wait, what's your favorite kind of pasta? I just have to ask.
It's my favorite kind of. I mean, I don't know if I have one favorite kind of pasta. It's they have a lot of. They have a lot of kind that you never even heard of. It's not just like spaghetti, linguine, stuff like that. I mean, they've got something called tripolline, which I had never heard of. That's kind of like got all like waves and ruffles in the pasta, and it like picks up the sauce. And
Oh my god,
it's yummy. But and then they'll put good stuff in it. They'll put sausage, they'll put chicken or shrimp or whatever.
Oh my God,
Um,
I'm hungry.
Me too.
yeah, I know. And it's a good spot. And of course, what's nice is it's the people who run it were in my class in Nyack High School. So
Oh, that's super
wow.
cool.
it's a nice connection that way too. And it just so happens that they've become masters at pasta making.
That's a good profession.
It really is.
Speaking about professions, would you ever run for president at some point in the future?
I think probably not. Of course, there's like that little piece where everybody who's interested in politics at all, you can be like, gee, what would that be like? But it's such a crazy lifestyle, it's such a crazy lifestyle, and these days, you just have to be willing to do absolutely nothing else. And there's a lot of other things I like doing beyond just running for office and asking people for money. So I don't see it. I'm certainly not going to be like Pete Buttigieg and running in my 30s for president.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, if you had to pick any other profession that wasn't in politics, what do you think that you would choose?
So there's probably a couple. I mean, I really enjoyed teaching when I did it, and I got out of teaching in 2008 because that was the year that Barack Obama was running, and I had been interested in politics as well, and I really wanted to get a role on a campaign, and actually moved down to Virginia to work on the Democratic campaign then.
Wow.
And try to get him elected, which luckily worked. But so I could easily, I really did enjoy teaching. It's so rewarding, and I taught elementary school, and especially with kids who are, in first grade, 5, 6, 7 years old, and helping them learn to read, learn the basics of math and things like that, and that was really rewarding. And so I could easily do that, and although it was easy is the wrong word, because it's the hardest job that I've ever had, for sure. But I also I went and got my master's degree in city planning, and did spend a few years in a nonprofit working in a planning role. So if I wasn't doing politics, I would probably be doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I have one question. What's your favorite band?
So I listen to a lot of music, actually, like everything from classical music all the way up to current. And
Really?
Really.
Oh my God.
Yes. I know. I try to keep eclectic. I play the piano a little bit too, so I never. I never was in a band, but I have a keyboard, and it's fun to play around. So I think probably overall I am kind of like a classic rock guy, so I do like the Beatles a lot as a band to listen to.
Yes.
But I always, I was when she was still alive, I really liked Amy Winehouse as well. I'm sorry.
I love her. Oh my God, I love her.
So it was that was really sad. But,
yeah, it was.
She's great. I mean, it's
She
instantly
is.
recognizable.
Yeah. So I just have to ask this question.
Sure.
Do you listen to Cardi B?
I have, not one of my top people.
I'm sure.
There's not a lot that I have to say, honestly. There's not a lot of music that I don't like. I mean, I'm not a huge country fan.
Literally.
But I have friends who are, and I don't hate it, but I'm pretty easy to please.
Good. Okay. So what inspired you to become a politician?
So I think it's not a quick, simple answer, but basically I looked around at everything going on in the world and everything kind of going on in society, and you realize that if you want things to get better, it's not going to happen. It has to happen. You have to have the right people in office.
Exactly.
And you have to, it's important what's happening now with people coming into the streets, people having rallies, people demonstrating. That is really important, and we want to keep that up, and it puts the pressure on people to really follow through. But ultimately, you also need people who have the right priorities, who are in a position to directly write and vote on laws. And so, to me, I grew up and was in college when George Bush was president, and seeing everything that was just sort of disastrous about his presidency, and the Iraq War going on, and ignoring even certainly Trump is much worse, but at the time it seemed like you couldn't get any worse than Bush. And ignoring climate change, which was a growing threat, and all of these things, I felt like I wanted to be involved. I spent several years working for local elected officials and people in Rockland County and Westchester, and then decided that it was time for me to step up and to try to use my voice and take some of the knowledge I'd learned and the connection that I felt with people and try to be a voice that was going to make some positive change here. And I do believe I believe that we have a system where positive change is possible. We've got tremendous problems as a country, but we are still a place, especially in a state like New York, where we can make real changes and improve people's lives. And we don't have to give up into sort of, too many people, I think, are just so cynical and they say nothing's ever going to change, so why even bother?
Exactly.
And that is they say a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you keep saying that and then you don't get involved, then of course they're not going to change, because the only people get involved are the ones who are out to line their own pockets or to manipulate the system. And
exactly.
I think you need people who really believe in reform and really believe in making things better to stay involved, and even to not get disappointed or disillusioned when things don't happen as quickly as they should, because it's been a slow process. I mean, I know the quote from Dr. King, which gets repeated a lot, of the arc of history being long but bending towards justice, is an important one. I do think that ultimately that's going to be true. We're just living through a real dark period right now. And, hopefully we'll start in a couple months from now with a new president making some progress to dig ourselves out of that hole.
Yeah, like, so much respect to you. Thank you so much for saying that. Like, in regards to like my involvement with the Black Lives Matter movement, like, people always ask me like, why are you so involved with politics? Like, what's the point? Nothing's gonna change. You're only a kid. You can't do anything. But I want to fight for a time where my life, a Black life, isn't viewed as politics. Like, I want it to be viewed as human rights, because it is at the end of the day human rights. So like, that kind of leads me to my.
You should.
Exactly.
Of course. I mean, you have to. There have been positive changes. I mean, I'm 36, and I have seen a lot of positive changes just in my life. And the change, for instance, hello.
Oh, sorry. 1 second.
Yeah.
Are we?
Okay, yeah, you can keep going. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just saying, I mean, just over the last 20 years, basically, for instance, there's been such an enormous change in rights for LGBTQ community. And, things that were 16 years ago, when George Bush was getting reelected, he ran his major chunk of the campaign was, oh my God, we can't allow gay marriage. If gay people get married, then it's going to take away from everybody else, and that helped win him some states. And the change has been profound, to where the less than 10 years later, the Supreme Court is saying that every state has to allow same-sex marriage. And that's marriage equality is something that went from unthinkable to just the law of the land in a pretty short amount of time.
Exactly.
And we're making a lot of progress on laws to, there's actually, shockingly, the Supreme Court, even with one of Trump's people on it, just, interpreted the law to say that, people federally are protected, LGBT people are protected from discrimination, which had never been true at a federal level before. And so that, to me, is a really good example of how things that seemed like they might take generations have happened with really quick speed, once the motion sort of happened, and once, people stayed engaged and they made the sustained argument, they kept. What helped, I think, with that is that people who maybe back 25 years ago felt like they didn't know anybody that was gay, and so they had all of these stereotypes about people who were gay, and then once they started realizing, oh, wait a second, they're just like anybody else, they just have a different person that they love, that kind of started breaking down the barriers a little bit. And my hope is that we'll see something similar, as you said, with Black Lives Matter, and that this is. It seems like just in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a greater public awareness in the white community of Black Lives Matter as a movement and as a principle. And when you poll poll white voters and under, say, 40 years old, there's tremendous support. And I think it's a question of some of it's generational change. Some of it is, it's so crazy to me that there are so many people that see the phrase Black Lives Matter and think that it means Black lives are the only lives that matter.
Thank
Screw everybody
you.
else.
Thank
and
you.
clearly that does not, and I don't know why that's hard to understand.
Exactly.
that it's like all lives matter, but that isn't how society treats Black lives.
Exactly.
And therefore we need to say that Black lives matter. And it frustrates me because you do see people trying to set this up as you either can care about Black lives or you can care about police. And it's got to be possible to say that, of course, we want to have a police department that's active, that's there, that's stopping crime, that's keeping the community safe and doing a good job, and that's also respecting the civil rights of people in the community.
Exactly.
And makes that I do not understand why this needs to be a controversy in that sense. And it's unfortunate in this race that I am in, that my opponent has already been, saying, "Oh, I'm going to defund the police. I'm going to, just turn everything over to the radicals."
Oh my God!
It's the same line that the president uses.
Of course,
and
of course.
I am not going to defund the police. I do think we need reform. I'm not going to, but I also am happy and proud to go and be seen and participate in rallies for Black lives.
And I think it also comes back to people really understanding what the definition of defunding the police is. Because when it comes to defunding education, I think everyone knows what that means. Just slowly taking funds away and reallocating them. That's the same thing we mean for defunding the police. We just want to reallocate funds towards housing, food, mental health services, just stuff like that can really help to build up a community and not putting a band-aid over a bullet wound by having the police come and fight everything. So
yeah, I mean, we gotta, in my mind, this can't be a trade-off. We need to make sure that communities are safe, that communities feel safe, and that communities and individuals have their civil rights and human rights fully respected.
Exactly.
And the fact that anybody, that friends of mine, that citizens, that residents in the community, that they feel unsafe simply because of the color of their skin walking around, that has to be unacceptable.
Exactly.
We cannot accept that as just the status quo or business as usual. And so that's my bottom line. We need to get to a place where people, should not have to worry that if they get stopped for speeding or for no reason at all, that it could turn deadly.
You're so right, literally. So I guess that leads me to my next question. What political/human rights issue do you feel doesn't get enough media attention?
So I guess I don't know if we need to limit it to the U.S. I mean, one of the things sort of internationally that you see some about, but it's totally horrific, is what's going on in China, where there's the whole,
my God.
Yeah, I mean, they have the whole, I think they're called the Uyghur people, who are Muslims in Western China, and they have been subjected to, at this point, seems to be maybe the worst genocide.
Yes, it is.
Cultural genocide, and almost since the Holocaust.
No.
And you've got it's so that I think is just crazy that we rightly have said, after the Holocaust, never again. We're not going to let countries, and that was never, that promise was never kept. There were genocides, in the later 20th century in Cambodia and other places like that. And but now it just seems like that message is faded, and so you've got the largest country in the world systematically trying to wipe out, even if not physically, but culturally, and putting people in re-education camps, and breaking up families, forcing women to get abortions, taking their children away. I mean, horrific stuff. And what's the world doing? Is almost nothing.
Exactly, you're so right.
So I to me, that's one of the things. Every time I read about it, it makes me mad, and I just feel kind of powerless because I don't know. There just seems to be no international attention really put on that because people don't want to, they don't want to get on China's bad side.
You're so right. I think Saya is gonna say something?
Yes, so thank you so much for speaking on that, and thank you so much, Elijah, for joining us again today. We really appreciated you speaking on raising income taxes on millionaires and legalizing marijuana and receiving tax revenues from that, and just funding schools overall, to social justice and the importance of good people in the streets and in office. Everything you said, thank you so much, and we really look forward to your campaign for a state senator.
Thanks so much, Sandra, and thanks, Saya, and we're, I was happy to do this, and good luck with the rest of the school year, and, thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good
Take
day.
care.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, this is Sandra, and you're listening to Let's Talk About It. No, Saya, he was amazing.
That was a great interview.
No, seriously, I don't think I've ever really heard a politician mention legalization of marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
No, seriously, and
he
said
spoke on a lot of issues very clearly that some people might view as super left or controversial. Mm-hmm. So I really commend him for that.
No, yeah, if Trump knew who he was, he'd consider him a terrorist or something. Seriously. And that was such a good interview. And he really talked about taxing the rich and the wealthy. That's something also I don't hear a lot of politicians talking about. They all think something, it should all come from the federal level, which is kind of a dumb way of thinking, But I really enjoyed that interview, and he spoke on Black Lives Matter especially. I know a lot of politicians kind of try to veer away from speaking on that, but he brought up a good point that if you just want to immediately go to all lives matter when being confronted with the phrase Black Lives Matter, then there is something wrong with that.
Exactly.
And if you have people being scared of police, there is something wrong with that. Mm-hmm. Don't you think there's something? Sorry, don't you think there's something wrong with the police, being there to protect and serve, but there's thousands of people being killed by the police each year?
Exactly. It's just a demonstration of what the function of policing is in our communities, and the fact that the immediate response after the Black Lives Matter movement popped up years ago was that police, Blue Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. That's a demonstration that the institution of policing is threatened if Black people and other people of color soon start to get recognition and rights that they've deserved this whole time.
Mm-hmm. And also I'm a little confused with the blue lives thing. Are you a Smurf? Are you born blue? I'm confused. Because if I'm not mistaken, I can't really take off my skin color at the end of the day when I want to take a shower or something. Mm-hmm. I can walk out, and be looked at as, black. But you can walk out, take off your clothes, and wear, plain clothes, and you will be considered blue. You know what I mean?
Absolutely true.
It's really just, ugh. And I can't believe, so many people are just so tone deaf.
And we've had this in our own communities. I believe this happened in New Rochelle, if I'm not mistaken. It could be White Plains. We have to check this. But a Black man who was a police officer was off duty. He was walking in the street around 5 p.m. He saw two people fighting. Yeah. And he started to break up the fight. His gun that was in his holster got off. Mm-hmm. And so he went to grab it. And so police heard the gunshot that happened when his gun was unholstered. And they killed him because he was Black.
Almost the same thing with Jacob Blake.
Exactly.
It's words can't even just describe the atrocities against Black lives, and it's and also something that really frustrates me. I don't know if you'll agree with this, but when people hear Black Lives Matter, they are immediately associated with the organization, right? Instead of actual lives. I'm talking about my life. Come on, I'm not talking about an organization when I say Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about Black people's lives being chastised for 400 years. Why is it so hard for people to understand?
It's a fundamental human right. It's not just a political statement.
Exactly. And we're being called communists, Marxists. I mean, thank you. Why is me fighting for my life a political issue? I brought up with Elijah, you know?
And something he was speaking on related to that, that I have a little more thoughts about, is how much strides the LGBTQ plus community has made in recent years in terms of the passage of same-sex marriage. I think something that's tough to think about in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement is, especially now, there's a greater consciousness about what would it mean for the United States as a society and as a government if people of color, regardless of income, were truly to receive the same amount of rights as white wealthy people. What would it mean for society it would essentially mean an overturning of capitalism.
Yep.
And the society as we know it. So I think these changes are super important and they have to get made, but I genuinely think it's going to require a lot more overhauling of pre-existing structures than legalization of same-sex marriage.
Exactly. You're so right. Like, you can't be an anti-racist without also being anti-capitalist and without recognizing that capitalism is built on the exploitation of people of color.
Exactly.
Especially the indigenous people and black people. So, like, you really just cannot say, oh, I love capitalism, and not understand that capitalism is literally the few controlling the many.
Exactly.
So it's
there's a lot of work to be done.
There's a lot of work, and you also need to overhaul those structures, as you said, and with that the culture will follow. If you want to overhaul the patriarchy, with that you'll have women being seen as equal to men. You know what I mean? Like, if you overhaul the structures that are in place, the systems and power that are in place, you will also overhaul, like, that culture of patriarchy, that culture of racism, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, I feel like the culture will follow the structures.
I definitely agree. Yeah, our society's been set up a way for centuries that are benefiting a small group of elite white people. And I do agree with what he's saying, that we have to get our foot in the door. We have to get people in power like himself, people that have priorities straight, aren't solely concerned with funding from millionaires and billionaires, aren't afraid to speak up on human rights issues, however controversial they might be. But we also need more than that.
Exactly.
We need work on every level of society, but I definitely agree. Getting people like Elijah in there will definitely help.
And whoever is listening to this right now, if you feel like an issue is, I don't want to worry about it, it's not going to get fixed, like, don't. If all of us had that same mindset, nothing would get done. We would have no progress. We would be living in the worst country possible, or the worst world possible, for a matter of fact. So if you really believe in something, you believe that there's change needed in a certain area, please work in any way to fight for that change. And example with the Black Lives Matter movement, signing petitions, educating your friends, so many things that can be done even as kids. And, like, it doesn't have to be you, like, oh, I'm going to run for president. It's going to take me, like, 10 years, but I'm going to run. Like, it doesn't have to be something so big. It doesn't have to be you setting up protests. It can just be you educating your friends and your family.
Exactly.
It's really just, like, we all need to come together to defeat one very bad person. And I'm afraid that, like, if he's not gone in November, the state of democracy in America will just... I don't even know, like, what will happen, because it's already unstable. And if we have 4 more years of him, we're going into a fascist state, and I don't think that's, like...
We need to be very careful. If you can vote this November...
Please do it.
Please vote.
Please. Like, we can't right now, but, like, if we could, we would. So, but, yeah, no, thank you guys so much for listening to this, and, you know, hope to come back at you with some more.